share my. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Is it? There we go. All right. So I think ready to go. Starting. First, I just want to say thank you to San Jose University for the role in supporting the conference today. I'm excited to be here and talk. So I'll give a little bit about myself and the library system I work for. Like I said, my name is Kelly Nielsen. I'm the manager of public services here at Brantford Public Library. I have an undergraduate degree in criminology and my MLS from the University of Toronto. I've been in public libraries since 2014 and in this role as manager of public services since 2018. We are a 2, soon to be 3 branch system in a mid-sized city that serves just over 100,000 people, and we're located about an hour outside of Toronto in Canada. We have about 65 staff at our library, about 40 of which are public service staff. Our main branch is in the downtown core, and it's home to a significantly large population of vulnerable individuals. So on a regular, daily, constant basis, we're dealing with homelessness, addiction, mental health issues. But we are lucky enough to have a full-time social service outreach worker on staff to assist us with those challenges that arise on a daily basis. So today I want to talk about burnout and how burnout and wellness are they're top of mind nowadays. For us, between COVID, the opioid crisis, the housing crisis, it's created this perfect storm for staff at my libraries. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know that a lot of us are dealing with the same things. But as the pandemic started to wind down, I realized that sort of the stress and the burden that my staff were experiencing didn't really go away. It sort of lingered there. And I was continuing to have those unproductive, quite frankly, negative conversations with some of my staff on a regular basis. We were talking about things that libraries shouldn't be doing, traditional versus non-traditional services, how to serve customers within the gray area, make exceptions, and provide that equitable service. But some of the conversations we were having, I felt like I was bashing my head against a wall. I just sort of wanted to say out loud, why are we debating this? This isn't up for debate. We're a public library. We exist within our community to serve our community, and that means changing to meet our customers' needs. So within these conversations, there were some red flags that were raised, and they indicated that some of the issues, not all of the issues, but some of them might have something to do with misalignment of values. So I decided to just do a little bit of research, sort of look into sort of what was going on. I didn't really know a lot about burnout. I hadn't really started digging yet. Our wellness initiatives had just we were getting them off the ground. We've done a lot now, and we've got a lot more sort of on the horizon. But sort of digging into that, we each have our own personal values. Our organizations have their values. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't. But when they don't, there is that increased risk of burnout. So I won't be throwing a ton of information or research at you today, because there's so much out there. It's quite amazing, really. What I really wanted to do was share some tips and suggestions for how to get a discussion going with your staff in an area that I feel is underlooked when we often talk about burnout, which is sort of that misalignment of values, and how when they don't align, it just makes our job a lot harder. Before I get going, though, I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot more to this conversation around burnout, that there's so many moving pieces to the puzzle, that work culture, job responsibilities, compensation, they all play a very large role. So this is just a small piece of the puzzle, and it's definitely not the largest, but like I said, I think it's important nonetheless. As I talk, I'm going to be talking as a manager, but I think this material is relevant for anyone to use and sort of pick apart and explore on their own as a staff member. So why I chose this topic is because I know I'm not the only one dealing with the realities of working in a public library right now. Our society is shifting, our community's needs are changing dramatically. our jobs, especially in urban centers, include much more than promoting literacy and lifelong learning. They include a lot of components of social service work that not everyone is comfortable with.
Kelly, can we interrupt real quickly? We're getting a request to slow down a little bit,
Oh,
if possible.
yes. Sorry, I can do that. Working in a public library is really hard work. It requires a certain set of skills, training, education, and experience, but it also requires a certain set of values and principles that without them, like I've said, it makes our job really hard. So we know that these requirements exist, and often we try and use this knowledge in the recruitment process to ensure that we're hiring the right individuals who share our organizational values. But I'm sure other people are in the same boat as well, that we work alongside individuals already in our organization that have some sort of variance of the value that they sit on different places on the spectrum for values. And I think it's really important that leaders assist staff in achieving and supporting wellness within the organization, but recognizing that it's a joint effort, that there's the responsibility of the employer, but there's also the responsibility of the employee. And I think leaders need to initiate these hard conversations. They need to work with staff to sort of increase learning and lines of communication. Without it, everyone struggles. So that's sort of where I got going. Was I was like, oh boy, I'm like, this is going to be a hard one. Recognizing that not everyone thinks that their values are misaligned. So what I did was I started conversations and I started listening to what was being said and trying to sort of read within the lines. There was a plethora. There were so many reasons why staff were unhappy and feeling burnt out, and the sort of traditional ones. But as I mentioned earlier, I just kept coming back to those red flags that really stood out around the differences that people had between their personal values and opinions and those of the organization. So I really wanted to see if the difference could be bridged, if all they needed was the spark to sort of relight and connect the pieces of, why we do this job, why we chose this career, or if there was more to it. So I decided to embark on this initiative to open up this topic for discussion. I decided that I was going to assign some readings to the public service staff and ask for them to participate in some exercises or activities. You can imagine I was everyone's favorite person. And I did this over the course of several months at our departmental public service meetings. And then I would assign separate time down the road if there was something that I wanted to touch base on in between these monthly meetings. I really didn't know where I was going with this initiative in any detail. There was a large component of this where I let them lead the direction through conversations or actions that came up in between our monthly meetings or exercises. And often I would start these meetings saying things like, we're going to continue doing these small engagement exercises to get us thinking about what we do as library workers for our community and the impacts that we make on our community. That reflection will be a natural part of this process. Also really sort of acknowledging that they didn't want to do this, and I knew that. And they thought some of these exercises were trivial. So saying, I know that you think some of these exercises are trivial or silly, but really what I want to do is provide an opportunity for us to get back to the basics, to share ideas, and hopefully relight that spark that brought us to public libraries in the first place. Saying some cheesy things like public libraries forge change, we adapt and provide what our community needs. So as you go and complete these readings or exercises, I really want you to remember where we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago, and think about what our future will look like considering the growth and change we're anticipating. So yes, a little bit of cheese in there. But I believe in that cheesiness. Like, I truly believe it in my heart. So I was okay to say it. I also tried to tie it into practical tasks at hand, that we were developing our new strategic plan with the board. So trying to chime in to appeal to the masses of both that practical, like, let's get ourselves ready for this new strategic plan so we can move it forward, but also appealing to that emotional nature that so many of us feel with our empathetic personalities. So some of the work we did, like I said, I assigned some readings. We started simple, really. We looked at what burnout is and what are the causes. And I used sources like Harvard Business Review, keeping it simple. We looked at organizational values. So we looked at the ALA's core public library values. We looked at our own institutional values and principles and other public libraries within close proximity to us, or sort of some of the larger Canadian public libraries. We also looked just sort of for fun and to sort of keep it a little bit on the lighter side. We looked at the Japanese concept of ikigai, which is sort of your reason for being, which you can sort of see the Venn diagram up on the screen. The purpose really here for the readings I assigned was to set the stage, to lay the groundwork. I just didn't want it to be overwhelming. I wanted there to be an element of fun and ease in there. As a manager, I did a lot more reading on my own, a lot. And it really helped within my growth and understanding of how I can increase and support my own wellness, but also those that are part of my team. And so we kept doing the work, and we did a couple exercises. One of the first ones we did was just a SWOT exercise. So I put some title pages around our auditorium during a meeting. I handed out tons of Post-its and pens and sort of let them go nuts with filling out the blanks of what we do well, what we don't do well, where we can do better, where we're stuck. It was a really engaging exercise, and they came up with a ton of responses. It was slow to start, but they really did sort of get involved, and they had some fun with it. And then we took all of those ideas and we shared them with the organization, which was nice. Another exercise that we did was I used this lovely book here, Ellen Bard's Your Workplace Wellness Toolkit, which I was sort of using on my own to begin with. And then I came across these exercises that she's already created and outlined for us, because it is sort of like a workbook style where you fill in the blanks type of thing. So I used them and I modified them a bit. And I asked staff to choose their 4 most important values. So whether it be kindness, love, courage, open-mindedness, growth, adventure, innovation, left it completely open to what their personal values were. And then the book goes on to ask, how does your work serve your personal values? So that was a big connecting question there. And then I asked them to compare their values to the organization's to see where there are similarities or differences. And then the book asks how they can serve or align their values more deeply. And it asks them to assign one action that they can take for each value that could help them behave more in line with their values. So some of the values they shared that they put as their top priority were fairness, community, serving others, trust, knowledge, growth. This exercise, I really they didn't have to write anything down for most of these little exercises that we did. The only thing I asked was sort of at the end of this several month period that they write a reflection on their thoughts of what they learned. And I intentionally did this. I kept it small because I knew writing something on paper and handing it in was going to be uncomfortable for a lot of staff. And I really wanted to minimize the negative experiences, but I also wanted to create a balance with my need as the leader of this project to know that they've done the work and they've put the thought in. So that way, when we're having conversations in the future, I know that they've participated up until this point. If I had to do it all again, I might change the delivery and execution of tasks. It could have gone smoother. It could have been less awkward. I really didn't know what I was doing. And like I said, I really did let them sort of lead the way to sort of help fill the gaps in where we were. And we were honestly all over the map. That sometimes they really did just need that spark to relight and see that value in the hard work that they do. And other times there was a misalignment. And that came across quite loud and clear. So I'm not going to sit here and promote any of necessarily like these resources or exercises, because I think each team is different. I think the important thing is to create engagement within your team and really just start that conversation. For me, that is the most important piece of what I learned, was to start the conversation. So choose ways that your staff or coworkers will engage with the issue. And yeah, keeping the conversation going is really the most important part for me. So I read the reflections, and I used that information that I gathered to hold important conversations and really connect with staff. Encouraging them to hold important conversations as well, but between themselves, and to have that honest and impactful discourse to really open up the lines of communications between employer and employee. By doing the initial work and assigning these exercises and getting to read the reflections, I now have all of these amazing openings in the challenging conversations I was sort of presented with before, where we were butting heads about what libraries do and the traditional versus non-traditional services. So these conversations are happening. They're happening in one-on-ones, they're happening in group meetings, they're happening in communications. But now I feel like I've literally shoved my foot in the door. And I can sit back and I can say things like, remember when we talked about this? Or it's similar or connected in this way. So I'm having all these really great, insightful, powerful conversations with staff about their purpose within their career, the joys they're experiencing, but also their struggles. And it's so much easier to have these conversations when we've already had the awkward, like we pulled the Band-Aid off, and now we're ready to keep going and digging in. So the work is definitely not done by any means. But we've reached a good starting point, or we're past the starting point, but we're getting there. That being said, I was no one's favorite person for the couple of months that we were doing this work. It wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. But like I said, it's made the world of difference in some of the communications that I've been having with staff. So if you're going to take on one of these hard conversations, acknowledge that there will be resistance, there will be grumbling, there will be questions. There was lots of, why do I have to do this? Why is she assigning homework? Don't I have enough work to do already? What is the point of this? Who does she think she is? But I really had to put aside my personal feelings on being liked and remember the goal I was trying to achieve. And I had to be honest with them for why we were doing it. These conversations take authenticity, they take integrity. It does no one any good if staff are unhappy and don't want to be there. Acknowledge that self-reflection is difficult, but it's an integral part of growth. And when you're looking to build that satisfaction from your job or your career, I think it is important to sort of like have a holistic approach and really evaluate all components. And be aware that public library work isn't for everyone. Sometimes people just need reminders for their why. They need to understand the impact they're making. and others need to be pushed to do the work, and some may realize it's not a good fit. Maybe they realize that libraries aren't their jam. Maybe they realize public libraries aren't their jam. Or maybe it's your system, or maybe it's they're working in an urban environment, but really they would be better suited to a rural system. This one was a hard one, but this definitely happened. Is maybe it's the fact that literacy and education were the draw that drew them into librarianship, but the shift that's taken place towards social service is unappealing, and it doesn't align with their values or bring them any joy. So maybe it's time to find a plan B and seek out that purpose. And that plan B part was actually something that Ryan Dowd talked about in one of his older videos on burnout and compassion fatigue, was that once you sort of have done the work and you realize that maybe this isn't a good fit, to come up that plan B so you don't feel stuck. So yeah, just being honest that this is a huge topic and it involves much more than just reading a couple articles or completing a bunch of exercises, but I really do think it's a good place to start. And like I've mentioned a couple times already, it does put the onus on both the employer and the employee for increasing wellness within the organization. So that's all I had to talk about. And it does look like there is a couple minutes left if anyone has any questions. Okay.
There are a few questions in the chat, if you don't mind. I can read them for you to make it a little easier. The first two can kind of be combined. Do you have, can you share any recommended readings, examples of exercises, and conversation prompts? You kind of touched on that, but if you wanted to elaborate.
A little bit. The book I'll mention again was that Ellen Bard's Your Work Wellness Toolkit. That was really helpful. If you do have access to Ryan Dowd's videos, he does have a newer one on burnout and compassion fatigue. We're also part of a research project that's happening called Emotions Matter with Hamilton Public Library and McMaster University. So that is something you could search, and I do think that the report is there, but basically it's a research project on emotional labor within public libraries. So they did this research project, and they've provided us some training that we're still in the process of doing. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, shout out to obviously having a strong foundation of trust with your staff to have productive conversations. And the question is, do you have any tips on moderating effectively, especially if you're speaking with a staff member who's resentful of a misalignment between professional and personal values?
Be honest. Say it. This is awkward. I don't like having this conversation. It goes a long way to building that trust or rapport with your staff person, because they feel it too. So that would sort of be my tip. Is for me, that authenticity part of it is be who you are. I'm an awkward, weird person as it is, so I stumble over my words and it doesn't always come out coherently, but I think it is appreciated when you are yourself.
Asking for book recommendations or resources for Ikigai, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, there's quite a few books out there, and honestly, I think I just picked like one of like the top Google searches on that with like a credible source. I didn't go too deep into it. I just wanted them to see that that there was other aspects to explore, that it didn't need to be like these like deep and dreary like reports on burnout and wellness and how we make it better. I felt like that topic allowed them to do a little bit more exploration by themselves, because I truly do believe that component of employer employee, and I feel like it often gets pushed onto the employer when the employee has a very large role to play in their happiness and well-being.
And in case you happen to know, has Ryan Dowd's training been updated to include a trauma-informed perspective?
I know that he's redoing all his de-escalation training, and there's definitely some trauma-informed care components into it. I can't recall though if his one on burnout and compassion fatigue touches on that. It's been probably about 6 months since I've watched it.
A question of staff impacted by COVID vaccine mandates. Were they invited to participate in the discourse? Those that may have felt resentful that workplace policies surrounding privacy and et cetera changed during those times.
We were sort of, by the time we did it, we were sort of coming out of the pandemic, where lots of our like capacity restrictions had already sort of been removed. But we did choose to do it in sort of our auditorium, which is our largest room, so that there was enough room for physical distancing requirements. And within our organization, no staff were laid off for not having vaccines.
A similarly difficult situation. How would you recommend dealing with coworkers who bring their religious views to work? These personal values tend to negatively affect cowork relations as well as patron interactions.
I think remembering that like we need to be respectful about anyone's point of view, whether it be religious or not, but there is a point where when you come into work, you've agreed to put your work hat on and support the organization's values. So as long as you can do that with respecting your own, I think obviously sometimes it doesn't happen, and that's where there's misalignment. But I often do use that, put your work hat on, take your work hat off, especially with staff that sort of do have some of those misalignment issues, that there is the expectation to perform your role correctly and properly and efficiently, that you do need to be supporting these things while you're here and being paid to do it.
How do we determine what value conflicts can be resolved with conversations, and which values cause too much harm to staff and or patrons for conversations to be successful?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
How do we determine what value conflicts can be resolved with conversations, and which values cause too much harm to staff and or patrons for conversations to be successful?
I think that's a lot of work that has to be done with the individual themselves to determine like what value are we talking about. But like I said previously, like there are expectations as an employee that you'll deliver excellent customer service, that you will serve all populations. So if there's like this is probably a pretty relatable example, is like a vulnerable population, a member of the vulnerable population, that they have to serve them, even if they don't want to, even if there's something within their value system that they don't believe in. It's still the expectation that they will serve the community.
And I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question exactly, but I think what I'm understanding is, you sort of have presented this to the employees, but how might the employee have these kind of conversations with the director? Like initiate, I suppose.
I think it can be done. It can be done casually. It can be done formally. But if you're an employee and you notice that a coworker, or it's sort of like a trend within your team, is there is some of that misalignment, I think it is important to bring it up to leadership. And it can be done just that simply, like out on the floor, stuff's not going well. These things are happening, A, B, C, and I think it's because their value systems aren't aligning with the organization. So they can go further into detail, they can ask more questions, but it's probably something they're already aware of. But bringing it up sort of might give leadership the confidence to address it, or give them a place to start.
Our time is up. For those that want to go to another thing, I don't know though, Kelly, if you would stay for 2 more questions if those folks want them answered.
Yeah, absolutely.
One is, do you have any recommendations about occasional pushbacks among staff?
Consistency. Just keep preaching the message.
And the final question was, do you think that part of the problem is that library workers are expected to be more like social workers? And do you think they need more training in this area?
I think for some people, 100%. It's a hard switch. It's especially for, I have staff that have been in the library 20, 30 years. They thought their biggest challenge was going to be learning how to use a computer. And now we're learning trauma-informed care. We're learning about overdoses and delivering naloxone. And so yes, there is a shift. And that can be a hard one. But library schools are changing too, and they're changing their curriculum. And I don't know, we're changing our hiring practices too, that I try and find a good mix of staff that have library experience, but also have good customer service experience, but also have an interest in social work or a background in some form of social service. Like myself, my undergrad was in criminology, so there was this natural interest in and a natural sort of shift when public libraries started leading that way. And I think that there's so many people within this profession that are empathetic and have huge hearts, and they want to make a difference, and they're just happy to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Also, just want to mention there was a lot of gratitude in the chat for your presentation today.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
All right, I think that's it. Yay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.